Welcome, everyone. Happy Thursday. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today is the second of 5 diversity lectures that we're having this season, and we're so glad that you can join us and have some interest in this topic. We're going to have a great speaker today that will be on momentarily, but I do want to remind folks that we have 3 more lectures, and we will pop the link into the chat during the lecture so you can check them out and sign up for those as well. And finally, just a save the date for you all. On Friday, April 21st at 6:30 p.m., we will have what I like to call the Big Baker Lecture, which is our annual lecture in honor of Augusta Baker. And this year we will have children's and YA author Renee Watson. So we'll have more information forthcoming about that registration, but just wanted to give you a heads up. So again, thank you. Looking forward to our conversation today. I'm going to turn it over to Sierra Harris, who is our Augusta Baker graduate assistant.
Hi, friends. I am so excited. Y'all have showed up and shown out today. If you're like me, I'm excited for every lecture, but I'm especially excited for today. And I'm so excited that so many of you all have shown up. So I'm going to be really brief. Today's session will be recorded, and the recording will be sent to all of our registered guests. We just ask that you mute yourself during the presentation, but utilize the chat feature to engage throughout. There will be an opportunity where you will be encouraged to unmute yourself and ask questions. So now on to the good stuff. Our speaker today is Tamar Evangelestia-Dougherty, the director of the Smithsonian Library and Archives. The recently integrated Smithsonian Library and Archives contains nearly 3 million library volumes and over 44,000 cubic feet of archival materials, chronicling the history of the Smithsonian. Tamar Evangelestia-Dougherty oversees 137 employees, a national advisory board of 15 members, and an annual budget of over $16 million, and 22 library branches and reading rooms located in Washington, D.C., New York City, Maryland, Virginia, and the Republic of Panama. Previously, she was the Associate University Librarian at Cornell University, where she initiated Cornell RAD, a research hub for rare and distinctive collections. She is also a faculty member at the University of California Rare Book School. She holds a master's degree and a master's of science in information science from Simmons University School of Library and Information Science in Boston, and a bachelor's degree in political science from the University of Houston. Let's all welcome our guests for today.
Thank you, Ciara, and thank you, Nicole. I'm sincerely grateful to be here, and I'm tremendously excited. I want to first ask, can everyone hear me? Okay, it's 80 degrees today in Washington, D.C. We weren't expecting that, so I have a fan going on, and I'm ready to get started about today. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay. And hopefully everyone can see my screen. The name of my presentation is Flourish or Perish, exploring the lived experience of trauma and librarianship. And just a little, just forward before I go on, where I come to this is, drawing across time and place. I always believe that libraries begin with librarians, and in understanding how I respond to my professional environments, I have to be self-aware and understand my own history with libraries and my own personal trauma. I encourage everybody to engage in the same exercise, because I feel that as librarians, we all have a unique sense of purpose, and we're capable of phenomenal things. My body of work in librarianship and cultural heritage draws on the many aspects of my identity as an African-American woman, as urban from Chicago. I also believe that you have to be very self-revelatory in this journey. And so what you see here is actually a picture of a source of trauma in my life. I grew up in Chicago. I was the daughter of a single mother. And in 1981, we hit on hard times, and we had to stay in this homeless shelter. It's called Pacific Garden Mission in Chicago, and that was the site. And if you look here on the 3rd floor, that is where my bed was, in the corner. Every floor had about 23 beds for women and children, and my mom and I had to sleep in the same single bunk. But for me, that was a personal ground zero. I was only about 11 years old. But what I would always do is I would go to the Chicago Public Library, which is now the Chicago Cultural Center, which was only a few blocks from the homeless shelter. And that's where my mom and I would spend our day. You know, we would get up in the morning in a homeless shelter. We had to do chores, cleaning toilets, things like that. We ate our breakfast with all the other, you know, homeless women and children and men. And then the shelter would put us out at 9 o'clock in the daytime, and we had to do something with our day. So we went to the library. And for me, I call it my pretend home. And I think that began my journey with libraries. Also, another source of trauma in a way was that although my mother was very embracing of libraries as a source of intellectual nourishment, as a sense of safety, she never fully embraced my career in libraries, and neither did my mom. And this is a picture of me when I was in high school, which is probably about 4 years after my mom and I were homeless. And you can see behind me, there's a card catalog, because I was always hanging out in a library. And so my relationship with libraries was a bit challenging, because I loved them so much and always wanted this as my career, but it was something that my family didn't really approve of. My grandmother said, you want to go to college so you can spend your life shelving books. They just didn't see me as doing anything lucrative, and wanted me to be a doctor or a lawyer. The trajectory from there went on that even though my family was against this career in libraries, I continuously got library jobs. And I always believe that you're going to end up in life where you're supposed to be. And so this is actually one of my first offer letters, and it was from Princeton University. And you can see it's from the year 2000, so 23 years ago. And my salary was $22,770.80. And that was what they paid me for working in the special collections reading room. And I also, while we're on this subject of what this job meant, I was not a professional librarian at this point. I was what you would call a paraprofessional, or someone at the Smithsonian, we call them library technicians. I want everyone to know, for the purposes of this talk, when I say library professional, I am including library technicians and paraprofessionals. We are all involved in library work. And that was my Princeton ID. And all I have to say is that was a long time ago. I can't believe how young I look. Moving on, I ended up going to Simmons for my library degree. And you can see in 2003, I get my first professional offer letter, which was from Columbia University. And the big thing I think you see here is that I was so happy that in, I think, let's just say 2 years, I went from $22,000 a year to 43. So I felt really proud of that it was kind of a big salary jump and double. But then again, you know, I had student loans and everything from graduate school. You know, part one, I'm looking at libraries as organizational cultures of trauma. Libraries were safe spaces for me to work until they weren't. And you hear a lot in the profession nowadays about trauma-informed leadership and trauma-informed librarianship. And, you know, here are some of the more popular publications. One that I really like to depend on is Trauma Stewardship. And one of my favorite books, which I suggest to everyone, even if you feel you are in healthy relationships, is Codependent No More, because it's not just about codependent relationships, but I really think that this book teaches you a lot about standing up for yourself in all situations and knowing what your boundaries are. One of the main issues around trauma in libraries is trauma and toxicity, but legacy trauma. That means something that happened a long time ago in your library that can still affect staff morale and work culture today. And I'm going to give you some examples. I have seen library workers hold a lot of grudges around people getting promotions. He got the library job I should have had 10 years ago. Now you have it, even though that person has moved on, and I'm still angry. Reorganizations. I used to be the chief and they eliminated my department. She used to report to me. Now we're all equal and I don't like it. There's something about the cult of personality or legacy leadership. So this is when you go into a library and someone has been a leader for a really long time. They could have been really dynamic. The staff came to see them as being the only person who could be the leader. And there's this idea that no one will ever be as good as our last director. She did things that way. And so what happens is you will see some legacy trauma in, because there's a little bit of Stockholm syndrome there too, which I'll talk about later. But they can't, it's very hard for new leaders to come into these situations. And I've even been in situations where staff members of a library were still having like weekly lunches with a library leader who retired. And it doesn't allow the new leader to forge a bond with the staff and create change in positive ways in their own way. Budget cuts. I worked at a library that was still experiencing legacy trauma around the economic downturn of 2008. Never forgave library administration for it. Library Stockholm syndrome is what happens when, let's say that you have a staff that says that they would like more agency. We would like to do more things like go to conferences. We would like to see more opportunities. We would like to have more inclusive leadership. But then you find that when you try to implement those changes to give them more leadership, they will kind of revert back to, we hope we don't fail. And you have to learn that you have to not only give them the opportunities, but you also have to give them the courage and they have to feel that they own those opportunities. Nepotism and favoritism. I've been at libraries where those things were quite the norm. And people felt as though they could never get ahead because they were not married to a certain faculty member. Past this prologue. That's basically, 12 years ago, she made a mistake. We're never going to forgive her for it again. So there's a lot of grudges there. The road to trauma-informed care calls for change in organizational culture, where emphasis is placed on understanding, respecting, and appropriately responding to the effects of trauma. You have to be very in tune with your library staff and addressing any potential re-traumatizing policies. There needs to be a team that's established and ensuring of administrative commitment. And you provide introductory training to staff and includes the providers and providees and planning and evaluation of services. I was involved in a situation where we had to use this map, and it was around dealing with the staff that had really deep-seated kind of systemic racism within it, to the point that they actually felt that they were, I guess, good, well-meaning white people around some of the Black collections that they were being in, but really had not come to grips with the fact that they had some very strong biases. There are times when legacy trauma can lead to secondary trauma in your library, and the test for that is you will ask the library staff, what does success look like to them, or a vision for a better library? And you will notice that you won't get an answer. If you ask for a resolution, the answer will always become more about what people did or did not do in the past, and not really how you can move on in the future. That is when you know that you have to kind of, there's more seed planting that you have to do. And if you notice that the staff puts up strong resistance to changing work culture holistically and being accountable at all levels. And when I say all levels, sometimes when you hear staff, we'll talk about accountability, or we all do. We tend to focus on leadership and not understanding that that has to happen at every level and be embedded in the culture at every level. Legacy trauma risks becoming secondary trauma when the present day attitudes and approaches to conflict resolution and building a healthy work culture are so impeded by the past that the library cannot move forward. The interpersonal climate of the library is very judging and unforgiving. And it gets passed on to new library administrations. And particularly since the global pandemic, we've seen a lot of new library administrations, a lot of turnover at the top. And if the new administration attempts to bring in more transparency and accountability or attempt to right the situation, they're met with resistance. And this can be, again, very, very challenging. No new employee comes in with a clean slate at this point. And you will see members, senior staff members in particular, assign blame to new staff members for legacy issues. And that's when the erosion of trust began. It's a type of projection. One big clue also I wanted to add is your new librarians who come into that legacy trauma that turns into secondary trauma usually will leave within 5 years. Wanted to talk about some symptoms of trauma. One is gaslighting. We hear the term gaslighting a lot when it applies to, frankly, romantic relationships, but it can also occur in the workplace. And I'm just going to give you some examples of times when I felt gaslighted as a librarian and who said it to me. I don't know anything about libraries. I expect you to teach me everything, but I will aggressively interrogate your decisions. So this was a person who was not from the LIS field, who was in a senior position to me, that did not know anything about archives, manuscripts, but I was expected to teach the person, but yet when I would attempt to train and work with them, they agreed with me on every little step. And it was a really contentious relationship. The other one, the work of the librarians is behind the scenes. Therefore, you're not mission critical or in need of protection during a pandemic, but we need you to open a library for the students. So those are contradictory statements and a bit of gaslighting. You know, there were some administrations and libraries who refused to say that librarians were frontline staff, but yet we had to be there to service the students. And that was when I think a lot of librarians began to see how much power we did not have in some of our universities, and that there were different, I guess, levels of respect that were assigned to certain workers. From faculty, I've had this said to me a number of times: librarians are strange people who are introverted. I think more than any negative thing about librarians, I've heard this the most. We hate access, but yet sometimes these same faculty members will turn around when they need a grant from NEH or Mellon and say, we need to list the library as a collaborator. Can you give me 2 paragraphs about how good you are at access? And then we get excited because we're working with faculty, we're collaborating, we feel like we're being accepted as fellow academics. But once the grant money is awarded, suddenly we're not asked to come to the meetings or have input in the project anymore. Lastly, I discovered something in the archive that no one has ever seen or heard about. Thank you for the finding aid. And suddenly the faculty member or researcher is an archivist, and they will take credit for their discovery without really sharing credit with the archivists and the curators who helped them find that. You know, please know that the discovery of whatever you found in the archive did not begin with a researcher. It took a lot of work from a lot of archivists and curators to actually make those things discoverable so they could be found. There's some ways or suggestions to resolving secondary trauma in your library. And the best way to creatively dissolve long-standing toxic narratives is to create a collaborative framework and a support system with a vision and roadmap for outcomes that heal, rather than focusing on groups and individuals. I always, when I coach people, I say people, especially when there's a lot of emotion invested, they tend to focus on people and relationships. And I always tell people to focus on the best outcome. What do we want to happen? And so take the personal out of it. Do make the organizational mission, values, and strategies holistically focused. Challenge monolithic perceptions of people or groups, such as one group that I think gets a lot of scrutiny and libraries is technical services staff or cataloging, especially from librarians who feel that they are more frontline, that they do more intellectual work. Catalogers have hopes and dreams in libraries too. Technical services is very important. They have a great amount of knowledge. You need to establish clearly defined roles and create a balance of agency. I use agency a lot. And agency is the ability to feel that you're supported in getting your work done. You foster transparency and decision-making, and enlist the help of a mediator, especially where toxicity is very calcified within specific departments. Also, a mediator is good because it's good for it to come from an outside impartial party a lot of times, because sometimes if library leadership tries to manage this change on their own, remember, you're still trying to build trust. So that's why a mediator can be good in many areas. Don't invest in the narratives that this is always the way it has been done in this library, and that's the way it's going to stay. Don't make decisions grounded in the past. Remember, your library's future is not in its past, and create accountability frameworks to address the work culture as you envision it in the present and future. Establish new committees and task force groups. Don't engage uninvited ghosts of your library's past. This may not be a popular opinion. I have seen libraries sometimes bring in past leaders to help address present trauma. I don't think I think that's going back to your past again, and that's something that I would not advise. Don't take sides. Don't be afraid to reorganize, restructure, or rehire to achieve a healthy library culture. And don't make changes for the sake of keeping the peace and sustaining toxic work dynamics. I think one of the things that has surprised me the most in the profession, especially as I've come into several administrative positions, is that a lot of times we'll have two staff members who don't work well together, and we will create a new job or a new department just so we can deal with those two relationships. Again, make it about the work, make it about the vision, make it about your goals and strategies. I'm not saying don't focus on people, but whenever you're doing changes that affect the whole organization, you got to base it more on the fact that Jenny and Carol don't get along, and they never have. The rapid recovery model, and I call this uninformed librarianship, trauma uninformed librarianship models. Fixing problems quickly by hiring new unsuspected victims or librarians, and waiting for that great unicorn to have all these ideas that will magically solve things. We're seeing a lot in librarianship where, especially in the wake of the George Floyd tragedy after COVID, we're seeing a lot of women who look like me, a lot of people of color being brought in to fix deep-seated trauma, especially around systemic racism. No one should be tasked with having to turn around a library culture within a year, 2 years, as though it is a sprint. It's not fair to the people coming in. So there is no unicorn, because unicorns are mythical beings, and mythical beings don't exist. And this is not a way to fix a problem. It's a way to potentially bring someone else in your organization who also ends up becoming a victim of the legacy trauma. I'm going to talk about the codependent relationship between library trauma and value. Because if libraries are so valuable, why must we keep reminding people again and again and again and again? And why doesn't society value library labor? I think an important dimension of legacy trauma is this need to prove our value. It's a one unifying characterization that librarians is seen as service providers, and it establishes a poor agency dynamic within the world outside of LIS. I have been in cocktail parties before when I've stated that I'm a librarian, and people have this perception that I shelve books, that I may not have a good salary, or I once had an Uber driver say to me, I guess many people don't think of doing that when they grow up. And, how do we fight this perception? But also we have this other dynamic that we fight amongst ourselves, when externally most of the people outside of LIS believe the things that we do best have to do with dusty old books. In my 30 years in the field, I've never witnessed a natural evolution from that trope, not even in the digital age. And don't forget, we serve the information needs of the world during the global pandemic, yet we still feel the need to prove our value. As my kind of personal metaphor for eternal labor of librarianship is the mythology around Sisyphus. He was immortalized for his punishment of being doomed to push a boulder up the hill for his eternity. His fate, I believe, is emblematic of the persistence of invisible labor and precarity in our profession. I believe that librarianship needs a new social contract with itself that focuses less on leaders and more on how do we work together as teams and collaborative problem solvers who are accountable for professional respect and success. I don't feel that our future is bulletproof when we're in this kind of a perpetual imposter syndrome. And it seems also that we're uncomfortable with adopting an entrepreneurial mindset and identifying competitive advantages to speaking up for ourselves. And I see LIS as a study in professional trauma because that's when members of the profession collectively acknowledge that as a group, we've been subjected to traumatizing events or mistreatment that leaves a deep-seated impact upon the group consciousness as a profession. And it makes our memories forever and changing our future identity. It changes how we see ourselves in the future in irrevocable ways. And I think, as I said before, it's our ethical responsibility to acknowledge, address, and take measures to identify and remedy the causes. And I'm going to say that it's no matter where we are as individuals in our careers as librarians, archivists, curators, the distress of other librarians is collectively our own. People come to me and, Tamar, you're the librarian of the Smithsonian. You must have achieved your dream. Yes, in a lot of ways, but I still don't forget the people who are out there who haven't achieved their dreams, who are underemployed, who are in precarious work. And to me, that's what makes the profession fully successful, is when we help reach back and we help one another. And I think we must speak of trauma and librarianship, not only in terms of what happens to us individually, but what happens to us as a collective. And we have to acknowledge that. And I also want to give a shout out to anyone who is a library dean, associate university librarian, people who are in library administration. It's been very hard, and leadership has taken a hit across the board in terms of lack of transparency, lack of accountability, forgetting about library staff. And I do want to say this, and I'm not making any defenses for anyone. Understand that many in library administration and leadership suffer in solitude. When I became an AUL, there were times when I really wanted to talk to someone and couldn't. There were times when I walked down the hall and staff would be at the water cooler or something talking, and it would part like the Red Sea because she's an AUL. We can't speak to her. I know, I'll share something personal without giving names. I know an AUL who was extremely criticized by her staff for not showing up to an event. They did not know that she had a miscarriage. She couldn't share that because it was very personal. So understand that your library leaders are people too. And if there's trauma in the library and you feel it's not getting addressed right away and low staff morale, understand that that library leader has to report to a provost or a higher administration and university who may not be supportive of the library. So this is where I'm saying it is professional trauma because it is at all levels. And again, that's Sisyphus pulling up that boulder, because some days you feel like you finally made headway, you finally got the university development office to see that you needed more money. You got the provost to see that, hey, you really need to give us a budget increase for salary increases per year. And then something happens to knock you back down again. And in terms of our values, you can see it all over. There are many articles about libraries as a misunderstood value. value and impact of a library. Multiple articles about demonstrating our value, to the point where sometimes I'm exhausted till I'm blue in the face, because maybe I'm just biased, but I feel that I don't always see other professions have to do that. Maybe besides teachers, I see nursing have to deal with this issue too. Again, proving the value of library collections. But I want to talk about ways we give away our library value. Not advocating for resources, not supporting our staff. The library is always wrong narratives. And this is dealing and fixing ourselves. Often I've seen two librarians having a disagreement about something. Let's say a faculty member spoke disrespectfully to a librarian, and rightfully so, the librarian was really upset. I've seen in maybe like 8 out of 10 cases, the librarian is the one that always comes out losing and has to apologize to the faculty member. I've had faculty members throw books at librarians before, and someone will just say, oh, that's just the way he is. And that is something that we have to put up with. We deserve to be treated with respect. You know, if the library is always going to lose the battle, why bother? And this is especially affecting early career librarians, because they see this. Complicit mediocrity is another problem, where some librarians have such low morale that they've decided to just do the bare minimum to get by. Letting other professions shape our narrative. This comes around a lot of journalism. You'll suddenly see people from the non-LIS professions talking about librarianship and how we should act and what we should do, making judgments on us. We need to have more librarians getting out there and publishing in Forbes, Harvard Business Review. You know, we do have an opinion that matters. So, you know, a lot of us feel safe just to publish in LIS publications or history, but I really do think we need to put our footprint more out there in terms of thought leadership with other professions. And that goes along with allowing people in the LIS profession who really shouldn't be, and giving them people positions of leadership. And, you know, in the Q&A, we can kind of talk about this, but there was a wave in the early 2000s of a lot of people coming into the profession who came into the profession because they were not doing well in their current professions, and would say, I'm in the library just because I got a job here. And often they're not integrated in a way that provides strategies for success for the people who are actually librarians. And so that affected me in multiple ways, particularly when I was at Columbia University. Again, lack of advocacy for our worth and expertise. I'm using this example of the American Library Association ringing in NASDAQ stock market closing bell, April 8th, 2022. I was really proud to see this. I was proud that ALA was invited to do this. I thought, you know, we look great. I was a little concerned when on social media, I started seeing librarians kind of criticize ALA for doing this. But to me, this is the kind of thing that we should be front and center more. And that was a proud moment for us. I want to compare it with looking at art museum directors and curators. These are all shots of curators in museums. They always have this confident look, arms folded. These are the pictures that I often find when I search for librarians. And I'm kind of juxtaposing it with how I was received at the Smithsonian Libraries. I am one of 10 new directors that Secretary Lonnie Bunch hired. This was my first time working in a large government. Well, it's not government, it's a federalish institution. But I was really pleased to see this, that they did a publication about all the new directors. This is Jorge Zamanello, new director of Museum of American Latino. Nairi Blankenberg, my good friend from National Museum of Art. Cynthia Chavez Lamar, new director for Museum of American Indian. Brandy Smith for the National Zoo. Josh Tewksbury for Smithsonian Tropical Institute. And I was really just overwhelmed with joy when they included me, because when I worked in academic and public libraries, sometimes I was so used to librarians not being included when they listed new leadership, except for maybe the dean, and that they asked me my input in the publication, and that they all saw me as part of the directorial family. I'm also sharing this article from the new Criterion that I don't know how many of you saw it, but if you saw this article, please say that you did in the chat. That was by James Panero, called "A Library by the Book on the Politicization of the American Library." And once again, these are really a lot of times people not from the field that are giving their kind of own narrative on us as librarians. But what struck me was that Emily Drabinski, who I admire, we're on faculty together at California Rare Book School, that he talks about the quiet, neutral library was out, full-throated progressive politics were in. As Emily Drabinski, a self-described Marxist lesbian who was recently elected to president of ALA, started her campaign. And so, this is, again, I think, kind of negative treatments of librarians and our advocacy in the field. And again, going from that article that I just showed you to what you just see now, I don't have any problem with this image of ALA ringing the NASDAQ bell. Per 3, authentic value in your library is mutually inclusive of meaning. And I want to share some ways that I think we can reclaim our value. We need to reclaim the value of innovation, and we should challenge prevailing assumptions about the future of librarianship. The epitome of everything that we are is not books, it's innovation. The 21st century library is about innovation. Again, focusing on collections holistically, digital and archival. Librarians and archivists and curators were valued as indispensable and essential during the global pandemic. That was our moment to seize it. We were front and center. And we needed to build on that momentum to create innovative ideas and also have some skin in the game at the table. I'm going to share an example from the Smithsonian. There was an email that went around about NFTs at the Smithsonian that we're building 5 different committees about it. Smithsonian Libraries and Archives was not invited to the table, but I had the courage to reach out to Deputy Secretary Maroy Park and said, this is a vital conversation that I really think the library should be involved in because we are part of that content. We need to communicate with our external peers as a value. Librarians like to talk to ourselves a lot, and I really think we've become siloed, and we need to contribute to discourse in other professional fields. And communicate with those professional stakeholders from a position of equity and empowerment, and not through the veil of library servitude and submission. One of the worst experiences I've had in librarianship was when I was working in law libraries. The way the law students and the lawyers would come in and talk to us, even the librarians who had a JD and an MLS, it was really astonishing. And I know a lot of good law librarians who left the field of librarianship because they just didn't feel as though they were treated as equal by other attorneys. We have to hear our negative self-talk about that. And we have to harness naturally occurring opportunities and collaborations with external professionals to our advantage. And also communicate and underscore our accomplishments with these partners. So I'm constantly, I know a lot of lawyers who use rare books and special collections, or a lot of artists. I talk about how excited I am about being a librarian and the work that we do just as much as they do. And meaning and value. I think this profession grapples with what value means. We have debates about value. We shout from the rooftops that we're valuable, but I really don't think we really understand the role of what that means And so we need to integrate more of the concept of meaning and impact when we demonstrate library value. It's not just about statistics. I've worked with some library administrators who feel that value is just the number of holdings that we have. Yes, we have 3 million volumes at the Smithsonian Libraries and Archives, but to me, one of the greatest things of value we have is the expertise of our staff. And the things that we can do and bring to the table just alongside with the museum curators that are there. So I'm begging you to reframe questions about your library value as questions about the meaning of the services and the collections. And finally, again, professionally engage. There are many who cannot join ALA, SAA, and others because of the membership fees. But even if it's just trying to read an article a week, be knowledgeable about the library trends and contribute effectively outside of your specialty. I love it when I see librarians publish in journals that are not just LIS journals. Encourage. This is a big one for me. We as library leaders need to cultivate courage. I'm seeing too many librarians be modest and downplaying our importance as a profession. We need to share stories of library joy, and we need to speak up when staff and our services are exploited and given few resources. We can win, everybody. We can have an happy ending. We need to counter narratives of defeat and supplement them and elevate narratives of triumph and culture and call out social injustice and systemic bias and inequity. Make those difficult decisions and question actions and decisions that are inconsistent with our mission and values. You can say no to donors. You don't have to take the collection of, I don't know, books about bubblegum wrappers and things like that. I've often seen in special collections that the librarians and curators feel forced to take collections that we can't service, and always act morally in the interest of a library and know when to fight and also know when to rest and know when to walk away. And passion. I try to be unfailing in my authenticity and passion for the enthusiasm at work at hand, but I also know sometimes you got to pick your battles, and there's a difference between resting on an issue and giving up. Don't be involved in drama that robs you of the 3 Ps, your passion, productivity, progress, and peace of mind. Avoid stagnation and reignite your flame. And again, authenticity, and be candid and never sell your library out. Be selfless. I'm the one I'm going to pick out. Don't hoard opportunities for leadership. I see a lot of people that are me. They take on every committee. They take on every speaking engagement. Give away leadership and turn around and say to someone on your staff, would you like to do this in my place? I think this is a good opportunity for you. And just coming in the end, the state of library joy. I just think everyone needs to do a professional reality check. We struggle to find a library culture that's perfect. There are no perfect libraries. In every library job, there's going to be an aspect of the organizational culture that will trouble you. There will be days when you don't feel like going to work. There's been those days for me, even at the Smithsonian. Yes. In every library job, you will have to manage your professional relationship with toxic LIS and non-LIS coworkers. And burnout and precarity, it's an epidemic within LIS. We're all in a fight for funding and increased agency. This is just a quick slide on qualities of a healthy library culture. Honestly, I've never been in one where every library had this framework. One was always missing something or the other. I have my own classification scheme of understanding organizational cultures within libraries. This is just my scheme. If you ever want this slide, I can share it with you, but I actually sat down and assigned a schema to different libraries I worked at, and hierarchy culture. There's one where I worked at a lot of Ivies. So you see Harvard, Princeton, and Columbia there, purpose and audience, New York Public Library. And so that's something I can talk about if anyone wants to expand on it later. This is my cultural scale. And these are kind of rankings of libraries I've worked with. And the ones that I was the most happy with was actually this one, the successful. But the library that, people ask me, what's the most perfect library you worked at? It was a place where there was high performance, mutual respect. They were a bit status quo, but you felt safe there and it was very prestigious. The one that I had the most fun at was mutual respect, diversity, innovative. I felt the staff was risk-taking and they were supportive and very funny. There was one where I had a great career. I felt it was tolerable. It was okay. The performances were high. They had respect for boundaries, prestigious. They were a bit risk-taking too. And then there are two libraries that I felt my career did not flourish in. And that's where there were some deep-seated issues of sexism, racism, hierarchy, nepotism. They were insular, trauma, a lot of gaslighting and gossip. And I have the skull and crossbones and the run for the hills. But always remember that your perspective of a library's culture is just one of many. If you're in doubt, challenge your perspective by comparing it with libraries where you felt the most authentic in terms of alignment with your goals. Be aware also of your own professional baggage, legacy, trauma, and biases. So have that conversation with yourself and look and ask the librarians there, how do you get your needs met given the culture? What does the library staff value? Can you adjust? Is change possible, or is the library hardwired into their DNA due to geographic location? I'm going to use Cornell as an example. I learned a lot at Cornell. I was there during the pandemic. But I, at my heart, am an urban girl. I was at Columbia, University of Chicago. It was very challenging being in Ithaca during the pandemic. And so I had to kind of look at myself, and even though there were like really high performing librarians there, they really believed in what they did, great commitment to the sciences. I, in the end, decided it was not a place where I could continue because I really missed living in larger cities. If you pick a library and run into cultural problems, just know that these things only happen to every librarian at least once. It happened to me twice, but don't let it define you, but do let it teach you. And just quickly, looking at any library, you will find libraries where it represents this on the left to one library, but it's someone's heaven to another librarian. I have friends who are still at libraries 20 years after I left, who is a library that I couldn't continue in, but they are thriving there. And lastly, flourishing. To flourish means to grow, to achieve success, to be in a state of activity or production, and to reach a height of development. To me, in librarianship, it's when you experience positive psychological and social functions and achieve optimal well-being most of the time. I didn't say all of the time. You have the ability to have relationships and connections, maintain pragmatic levels of expectations, get your basic needs met, demonstrate your worth, and cultivate your best authentic self. Lastly, just finding my groove. I'm doing okay. At the Smithsonian, there are a lot of people, even in ARL land, that felt that that was quite a departure for me to go into museums, but I wanted to learn new things, and I'm doing exactly that. I am working with my staff on looking at the narrative of our past to fearlessly empower our future. I always use the word fearless with them because I do believe as librarians we should be fearless. I remind everyone that we are where the research at the Smithsonian begins. It's challenging in museum libraries where the museum is front and center. The libraries has been told that we're back of the house, and that has been in some ways crippling to the morale of the staff. So I'm doing more to let them know that their work is important. As you can see here in the exhibits, this is a Cooper Hewitt. There's a book from our libraries right there by the exhibit showing how our research in the libraries informed the exhibitions that the curators work on. I tell them that my vision is inspired by your work. It's not my vision. My vision is to make this the #1 museum library research system in the world. And that my vision for them is not neutral. And just to show you that we also have problems in demonstrating value too in the Smithsonian, this is a Washington Post article about a book, I guess a book exhibit that we had. They did not credit Smithsonian Libraries and Archives with the book. It was a museum that was credited, and we had to write to them. And you see right here that they changed it to say Smithsonian Libraries and Archives. But when you look at the text, they only said curated by Smithsonian conservators and preservation experts, and didn't mention that they are from the Libraries and Archives division. So there again is Sisyphus pushing that boulder, uphill. I report to the Undersecretary for Science and Research, Ellen Stofan. I have one of the best bosses in the world. She comes from NASA, Director of Air and Space. And one thing I love about her is that she'll say to me, she's never had a library in her portfolio, but she does her best to respect what I do and help me succeed at the Smithsonian. And I get along with all the library directors. That's one of the favorite parts of my job. And we can get really silly sometimes. And I was assigned a mentor who was Anthea Hardick, who is the director of the National Museum of American History. So I'm experiencing really great relationships there. Secretary Bunch has a great fondness for research and the libraries and comes to visit us. And, as I talk about looking back to move forward, I'm just really in a happy place where I believe that, this institution represents the core of what I believe in, and enjoy the speaking that I've done. And this was me in Glasgow, Scotland, delivering a keynote address. And just finally, just my advocacy again, and advocating for librarians' voice to be heard. So check me out on Twitter. And this was just a staff event. I believe that we're recently merged units, Smithsonian Libraries and Archives. And I said, I want a tote bag. I want us to be able to carry that name proudly. And so I gave those out to the staff. And just finally, that was my mom and I in 1982, a year after we finally secured housing. I don't know if my mother would be proud of me today. She's not with us anymore, and neither is my brother. But I took the very best of her and what she taught me about libraries and did, the best that I can. And I think I'm in a place of flourishing and joy to go from being that kid in 1987 in Chicago who did not have a lot of money, humble beginnings, and now director of the world's largest museum library system. And just a plug, if anyone wants to take rare book school classes, we are doing a whole Smithsonian week. Thank you for hearing me out today.
Thank you so much. You're getting lots of love in the chat. So we do have a couple of questions for you, and we'll get through as many of them as we can. So the first question, I would like you to discuss how you handle trauma in the workplace.
One of the things that I talk about self-awareness is that I always have to come to it acknowledging my own baggage that I'm bringing into a situation. I'll be honest, I had two libraries that really burned me and left me with some emotional scars around this. Sometimes I'll notice that when I'm trying to problem solve, I will react from that old Tamar self of fear for what happened. And so I have to kind of do a check on myself for that. I always ask for advice. At the Smithsonian, I can go to Undersecretary Stefan. There are so many other museum directors who have great knowledge, but I also really would like the staffs to define what success looks like to them in this situation as we're trying to solve it. And I want to remind everyone, it's not going to be a sprint, it's a marathon. I think too many leaders are not given enough time to actually lead change. The staffs will want it right away. We're coming off a pandemic. So we have to demonstrate empathy for each other and also trust in that we all want the best intentions. When I look at trauma, I say the one thing that's in common, everyone cares about the library and the collections and the services, and we need to start from that point.
Awesome, thank you. The next question is, how do you define library culture? The questioner says, I posed this question to my colleagues during strategic priorities planning and no one could answer it.
Library culture, just a quick answer, is the set of values and norms that you operate from. It's also how you get your needs met in the library. When I gave you that kind of diagram of some of the libraries I worked at, the number one on the list that I called healthy was actually Yale University. High performing, everybody was publishing, going to conferences. That was a deep-seated value for the Yale librarians. I really liked that. I ended up going to Columbia, where it was a little, I'm looking at Curtis Kingrick because we were both at Columbia. I felt Columbia had a little bit of the golden cuffs there. I felt there were some librarians at Columbia that were kind of coasting, to be honest. But this is what I liked about Columbia. They didn't stop me or Curtis from excelling. We were always encouraged by Jim Neal to be our best selves. And actually, looking back on my career, that was one of my more positive experiences in librarianship, because I believe that Columbia let me be my authentic self. I think the culture was kind of just what goes. They were very vested in the services that they were doing. But Jerry Breeze, a librarian who was passed away, said to me once, you know what, Tamar, I'm out there, that I'm all for you, that you're a shooting star. I'm a black hole. He said, but I'm comfortable with you being a shooting star, and you go, girl. So yeah, the culture is the set of values from which the library operates.
Excellent, thank you. Our next question, and I think we can get these last two in. Is there a certain trauma experienced by librarians who watch colleagues work a position for 2 to 3 years and then leave for another position, perhaps again for another 2 to 3 years, before coming into a new position at a third institution? For example, trauma experienced by those left behind from those who advance in their careers in this hopscotch fashion, while others, for whatever reason, cannot make those kinds of moves, but try to advance where they are over the long haul.
Right. I want to acknowledge that one of the things I think has allowed me to be successful is that I've always been pretty mobile in my library career. I have, Chicago, Boston. I think the place that was most out of my comfort zone was probably Cornell, because it was in Ithaca, which is remote and rural. That was a library where a lot of people, they believed in raising their families in Ithaca. And so it is a challenge, when you have to be in one place because maybe your husband is on faculty, maybe your family is there, you may have sick parents. And, I have to say, I think the worst thing you can do for yourself is kind of measuring your library career based on someone else's journey. I don't see any benefit coming to you from that. You have to make your own kind of metric or for success and what that looks like for you.
Yes, exactly. I think that your response is spot on with that. Absolutely. And the final question, and I think you've addressed so much of this through your talk today, but the last question is, what advice would you have for someone just starting out? They say, I'm currently library staff, hoping to go into my master's, and I can't wait to get started.
Wow, because that goes along with what would I say to my old self 20 years ago if I could go back. I think, you know, in term, a lot of newer people, they have this idea of a dream library in their head, and as I said, there is there's really no dream library. I think when you're applying for jobs, you can ask a lot of questions about the culture. I just want to warn you that if someone says that this was not a right fit for me, know that some libraries are better for early career professionals and some are better for senior career or mid-career. For example, I think Columbia was actually a good place for early career librarianship. And I wanted to give a shout out, big one, to Curtis, because Curtis helped me in a way that I don't think he knew when I was at Columbia. I was asked to do I was basically given a book project to publish a book with Columbia Press. I had no idea how to start the project, and I just happened to mention to Curtis that you know, I was struggling, and that the rare book department didn't give me any advice. And the next thing I know, I was given kind of a draft of what to do, and I know Curtis had something to do with it. He must have said something to Jim Neal or Gene Ashton. And so look for places where people will have your back. And that, but also know that your dream job, you know, a lot of people in special collections want to go to Beinecke, things like that. Even if you don't achieve that dream job in your first year, know that it might be there for you 20 years down the road. I never knew I would be director of Smithsonian Libraries and Archives. Honestly, my goal was to work at the Library of Congress, and also stay curious. And let it throw you some surprises and see where you end up.
That is a perfect note to conclude our session today. Thank you again so much. You've got amazing comments, so much interaction, which we love to see. And as one person in the chat said, thank you for your vulnerability, and thank you for your candor, and thank you for having this conversation with us.
Thank you so much. And please feel free to reach out to me, any of you.
Okay. Thank you all so much. It's been a pleasure having you this afternoon, and we hope to see you at a future lecture. Thanks again.
Bye.